Let me paint you a picture. A quiet cul-de-sac in a sleepy suburban neighborhood, where the most exciting thing is usually Mrs. Henderson's cat getting stuck in a tree. Again, my name's Jack, 62 years young, retired, and living the dream of drinking coffee on my porch without a single meeting on my calendar. I've got a modest house, a pristine lawn I mow myself, because I'm not that retired, and a driveway I poured sweat and concrete into back when I moved in. It's my slice of peace after a career I don't talk about much. Let's just say it involved a lot of people saluting me before I traded my boots for slippers. Enter Karen. Oh, Karen. If entitlement had a mascot, it'd be her, clutching a Starbucks cup and a clipboard like they're the scepter and orb of suburban royalty. She's the HOA president, naturally, because who else would volunteer to police people's grass height with a ruler? Karen lives 2 houses down, in a McMansion that looks like it's trying to cosplay as a Tuscan villa. She's got this pinched expression, like she's perpetually sucking on a lemon, and a voice that could make a dog howl from a mile away. I knew she was trouble the day I moved in, when she left a welcome note on my door complaining that my mailbox was 0.5 inches too tall. I laughed, tossed it in the recycling, and figured that'd be the end of it. Spoiler, it wasn't. It started small, as these things do. A passive-aggressive letter in my mailbox about my non-compliant porch light wattage. Then an email about my unauthorized flower beds. They're daisies, Karen, not a meth lab. I ignored them, because life's too short, and I've dealt with worse than a nosy neighbor with a power trip. But then she set her sights on my driveway. My pride and joy, the smoothest slab of concrete this side of the county, wide enough for my truck and my old Mustang, with a little extra room for my buddy's RV when he visits. Apparently, Karen decided that extra strip of pavement was her property because it looked like it extended past the property line. Newsflash, it didn't. The first shot across the bow was a neon orange sticker slapped on my Mustang one morning, declaring it improperly parked on association property. I peeled it off, chuckling at the audacity, and figured she'd gotten her cardio for the day. But then came the emails. 3 of them, each more unhinged than the last, demanding I cease using the disputed area and submit a formal request for boundary clarification. I replied with a single line. Check the county records, Karen. Pro tip, never underestimate a Karen's ability to ignore facts. She didn't check anything. Instead, she escalated. By week 2, she was out there with a tape measure, squinting at my driveway like it personally offended her. She'd scribble notes, mutter to herself, and shoot me death glares whenever I waved from my porch. I started calling her Surveyor Karen in my head, because she was out there so often I half expected her to plant a flag. My neighbor, Tom, a retired mechanic with a beard that could hide a squirrel, thought it was hilarious. She's gonna annex your driveway for the HOA empire, he joked, handing me a beer. I laughed, but I could feel the tension creeping in. Karen wasn't just annoying, she was obsessed. Then came the first real jab. One morning, I found a notice of violation taped to my front door, claiming I owed $500 for encroaching on communal property. The letter was on official HOA letterhead, signed with Karen's loopy signature, and included a grainy photo of my truck parked in my own driveway. I stared at it, coffee going cold in my hand, and felt my old instincts kick in, the ones that used to deal with far bigger threats than a suburban dictator. I didn't get mad. I got strategic. I pulled up the county property records online, printed out the survey map showing my driveway was 100% mine, and taped it to her front door with a post-it that said, "Facts don't care about your feelings." Immature? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. I thought that'd shut her down. But Karen doesn't do shut down. She does escalate to nuclear. A few days later, I caught her standing in my driveway, taking photos with her phone and muttering about eminent domain. I leaned out my window and called, "You planning to build a highway through my property, Karen?" She didn't answer, just scurried back to her McMansion like a squirrel with a stolen nut. That's when I knew this wasn't just about a driveway. This was personal. Karen wasn't just wrong. She was entitled, armed with a clipboard and a vendetta, and she was coming for me. What she didn't know was who I was before I retired. Let's just say I've handled worse than her kind, and I wasn't about to let her steamroll me. I started keeping a log of her antics, because something told me I'd need it. And boy, was I right. The tension was building, and I could feel the neighborhood watching. Tom was already on my side, and Mrs. Henderson, the cat lady, started giving me sympathetic nods when she saw me. Karen thought she had the upper hand, but she was about to learn that concrete isn't the only thing I know how to hold firm. So there I was, Jack, retired and just trying to enjoy my coffee without a side of HOA nonsense. But Karen had other plans. After I slapped the county property records on her door, I figured she'd back off, maybe go measure someone else's mailbox for fun. Nope. Karen didn't just double down. She went full Napoleon, ready to conquer my driveway like it was her personal Waterloo. And let me tell you, her clipboard was working overtime. The next week started with a new letter. This one so official looking it probably took her an hour to pick the font. It demanded I immediately cease use of the disputed driveway area and pay a $1,000 fine for repeated violations. The best part? It claimed my truck's excessive tire tread was damaging communal pavement. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Damaging pavement? Lady, my truck's tires are less aggressive than your hairspray. I tossed the letter in my growing Karen file and decided to keep an eye on her. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd be ready. Sure enough, Karen escalated. One morning, I caught her in my driveway with a can of spray paint, marking an ugly yellow line where she claimed her property started. I stepped outside, arms crossed, and said, "Karen, you planning to turn my driveway into a modern art exhibit?" She froze, paint can in hand, and gave me that lemon-sucking glare. "This is for clarity, Jack," she snapped. "You'll thank me when the HOA enforces the boundary." Thank her? I'd sooner thank a mosquito for a good night's sleep. I took a photo of her vandalism, because that's what it was, and added it to the Karen file. Then I called Tom, my bearded neighbor, who ambled over with a beer and a grin. "She's out here playing Picasso," he said, eyeing the yellow line. "What's next offense?" I shrugged, but the thought stuck. Karen wasn't just annoying, she was unhinged. I checked the property records again, confirming my driveway was mined down to the last inch, and emailed her a PDF with a polite note. "Spray paint's a bold choice, but the county disagrees with your map." No response. Just eerie silence. Then came the signs. Oh yeah, Karen went full HOA warlord and stuck 3 NO parking. HOA property signs in my driveway, hammered into my lawn like she was staking a claim in the Wild West. I pulled them out, tossed them in my garage, and left a post-it on her mailbox. Nice signs. They look better in my collection. Petty? Sure. But Karen was testing my patience, and I've got a low tolerance for entitled clipboard queens. The neighborhood was starting to notice. Mrs. Henderson, the cat lady, stopped by with cookies and a whisper. "Karen's telling everyone you're a squatter." A squatter? In my own house. I thanked her for the heads up and added it to the file. Tom reported that Karen was holding emergency HOA meetings at her McMansion, rallying her loyal minions, mostly other Karens with matching haircuts, to protect the community. From what, my daisies? I decided it was time to get proactive. I dug into the HOA bylaws, a 50-page snooze fest that Karen clearly treated as her personal Bible. Turns out, she'd violated at least 3 rules: unauthorized property markings, unapproved signage, and harassment of a homeowner. I drafted a formal complaint to the HOA board, citing her antics with photos and timestamps, and sent it certified mail. I also installed a cheap security camera pointed at my driveway. If Karen wanted to play surveyor, I'd have her on tape. But Karen wasn't done. One evening, I came home to find a tow truck in my driveway, hooking up my Mustang. The driver, a nervous kid who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, said, "HOA called. Said this car's on their property." I told him to unhook it, showed him the property records, and sent him on his way. Then I marched to Karen's house, records in hand, and knocked. She opened the door, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, already dialing. "Jack, you're trespassing," she said, like I was the one causing a scene. "Leave, or I'll call the cops." "Go ahead," I said, grinning. "I'd love to chat with them." She blinked, thrown off by my calm, and slammed the door. I went home, poured a whiskey, and waited. Sure enough, an hour later, red and blue lights flashed outside. Karen had called the cops, thinking she'd won. What she didn't know was who I was before I retired, or who I knew at the sheriff's department. This was about to get interesting. So there I was, Jack, retired and sipping whiskey on my porch, watching red and blue lights dance across my lawn like a low-budget disco. Karen had called the cops, thinking she'd finally checkmate me over my own driveway. Oh, Karen. If hubris was a currency, she'd be buying private islands. I set my glass down, grabbed my Karen file, now a hefty stack of photos, letters, and property records, and stepped outside to meet the officers. This was about to be the highlight of my week. 2 deputies climbed out of the cruiser, one a young guy with a buzz cut, the other older, with a familiar face I couldn't quite place. Karen was already there, standing in my driveway like she owned it, clipboard in hand, gesturing wildly at my Mustang. "This man is illegally occupying HOA property," she declared, her voice shrill enough to crack glass. "I've warned him multiple times, and he refuses to comply." I leaned against my porch railing, arms crossed, and let her rant. The younger deputy looked bored. The older one was squinting at me like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Evening, officers," I said, calm as a summer breeze. "Care to see the property records that prove this driveway's mine?" Karen's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing like I'd just insulted her Starbucks order. "Those records are outdated," she sputtered. "The HOA has jurisdiction." I handed the older deputy my file, complete with the county survey map, timestamps of her spray paint stunt, and photos of her signs. He flipped through it, eyebrows climbing higher with each page. Karen wasn't having it. She launched into a tirade about community standards and rogue homeowners, pointing at my truck like it was a war crime. I couldn't resist. "Karen, the only rogue here is your spray paint can. Should I bill you for the cleanup?" Her face turned the color of her neon orange violation stickers, and she started dialing her phone again, muttering about escalating to the sheriff. The younger deputy sighed, clearly wishing he'd called in sick. Then the older deputy spoke up. Jack Sullivan." I looked at him, and it clicked. Deputy Mike, one of the guys I'd worked with back in the day, before I traded my old life for lawnmowers and coffee. He broke into a grin, snapped a quick salute, and said, "Sir, good to see you. Everything okay here?" Karen froze mid-dial, her phone hovering like she'd forgotten how it worked. The younger deputy looked confused, but Mike's tone had shifted, less cop, more old comrade. "I'm fine, Mike," I said, nodding. "Just dealing with a neighbor who thinks my driveway's her personal empire." I shot Karen a look, and she flinched like I'd thrown a lemon at her. Mike turned to her, still holding my file. "Ma'am, these records look solid. You got anything to counter this?" Karen stammered, waving her clipboard like it was a magic wand. "The HOA has authority. He's violating bylaws." Mike didn't blink. "HOA doesn't trump county records, ma'am. You're on his property." I could have kissed Mike right then, but I settled for a smirk. Karen, however, wasn't ready to surrender. She insisted the deputies confiscate my Mustang for evidence and demanded they issue me a citation for trespassing. Mike handed me back my file, his grin widening. "Jack, you want us to do anything here, or you got this?" I shrugged. "I'm good, Mike. Just make sure she doesn't paint my house next." The younger deputy snorted, and Karen looked like she'd swallowed her own clipboard. The deputies left, advising Karen to verify her claims before calling them again. She stormed off, muttering about corrupt cops and filing complaints. I waved at her retreating figure. "Night, Karen. Let me know when you want those signs back." Tom, who'd been watching from his porch, wandered over with a fresh beer. "Man, she's gonna stroke out," he said, chuckling. "What's with the salute, though? You some secret general?" I just winked. "Let's just say I've got friends in high places." But Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke to an email from the HOA, announcing an emergency meeting to discuss my noncompliance. Attached was a new fine, $2,500 for defacing HOA property, aka removing her signs, and harassing the president, aka existing. I laughed, but the stakes were climbing. Karen was rallying her minions, and I knew she'd try something bigger. So I called a few old contacts, including a lawyer friend who owed me a favor, and started planning. If Karen wanted a war, I'd bring the artillery. The neighborhood was buzzing now. Mrs. Henderson slipped me a note saying Karen was spreading rumors I was running an illegal business from my garage. Tom reported seeing her snooping around my property line again, this time with a guy in a suit who looked like he'd rather be golfing. I checked my security footage and caught her on tape, pointing at my driveway and gesturing like she was directing a Broadway show. The Karen file was getting thicker, and I was ready to turn her own game against her. So, there I was, Jack, retired and ready to turn Karen's HOA crusade into her personal nightmare. After her cop-calling stunt backfired, complete with Deputy Mike's salute and Karen's meltdown, she'd gone full supervillain, scheduling an emergency HOA meeting to address my noncompliance. The email, dripping with self-righteous fury, demanded my presence to answer for my actions and threatened a $2,500 fine for defacing HOA property, aka pulling her signs out of my lawn. I printed it out, added it to the Karen file, and grinned. If she wanted a showdown, I'd bring the popcorn and a few surprises. The meeting was set for Saturday at the community center, a bland beige building that smelled like stale coffee and regret. I called my lawyer friend, Sarah, who dealt with more HOA nonsense than anyone should. She laughed when I sent her the Karen file. "This woman's a walking lawsuit," she said. "Let's bury her in paperwork." We spent 2 days prepping, pulling HOA bylaws, cross-referencing her violations, and drafting a counter-complaint that could double as a novel. I also rallied some allies. Tom, my bearded neighbor, was in, promising to bring his "don't mess with me" vibe. Mrs. Henderson, the cat lady, agreed to show up and accidentally spill tea about Karen's other schemes. The night before the meeting, Karen upped the ante. I checked my security footage and caught her and a suit-wearing guy, probably her realtor buddy, poking around my driveway with a measuring tape at dusk. She was pointing at my Mustang like it was evidence in a murder trial. I saved the clip, emailed it to Sarah, and added a note. "Karen's auditioning for CSI, Suburbia." Sarah replied, "This is gold. Keep her coming." Oh, Karen was coming. All right. And I was ready to flip her clipboard kingdom upside down. Saturday arrived, hot and humid, the kind of day where Karen's hairspray probably needed its own lawyer. I strolled into the community center with my file, Sarah's legal docs, and a thermos of coffee that said, "I'm here to win." The room was packed with neighbors, most looking like they'd rather be at a root canal. Karen stood at the front, flanked by her HOA minions, 3 women with identical bobs and scowls, wielding her clipboard like a gavel. "We're here to address Jack Sullivan's flagrant violations," she began, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "He's encroached on HOA property, defaced signs, and harassed me personally." I raised my hand, "Casual as you please. Mind if I respond, Your Majesty?" The room snickered, and Karen's face went beet red. She sputtered but nodded, probably thinking I'd crumble under her glare. I stood, holding up the county property records. "Let's start with facts. This survey says my driveway's mine. Karen's been spray painting it, planting signs on my lawn, and calling tow trucks. I've got video." I played the security footage on my phone, passing it to Tom, who held it up for the crowd. Gasps rippled through the room as Karen's dusk-time measuring spree lit up the screen. Karen tried to interrupt, waving her clipboard. "That's irrelevant. The HOA has jurisdiction." I smiled. "Funny you mention jurisdiction. Your bylaws say you can't mark private property or harass homeowners." I filed a formal complaint with the board. I handed out copies of my complaint, complete with photos, timestamps, and Sarah's legal letter threatening a lawsuit for trespassing and defamation. The minions shifted uncomfortably, and Karen's lemon-sucking face hit new levels of pucker. Tom chimed in, his voice booming. "She tried to fine me for my truck's oil stains last year, but my driveway's concrete, not asphalt. She's been pulling this crap forever." Mrs. Henderson stood, clutching her purse. "Karen told me my cat's collar was non-compliant and threatened to impound him." The room erupted in murmurs. Turns out, Karen's clipboard had terrorized more than just me. I seized the moment. If we're voting on anything tonight, how about removing a president who abuses power? Karen slammed her clipboard down. You can't do that. I'm elected. Sarah's letter begged to differ, citing a bylaw allowing a recall vote with enough signatures. I passed around a petition, and hands shot up to sign. Tom, Mrs. Henderson, even the quiet guy who only mowed his lawn at midnight. Karen's minions started whispering, and one bolted for the door. The tide was turning, but Karen wasn't done. She stormed out, yelling about calling the sheriff and escalating this to the county. I leaned back, sipping my coffee. She had no idea what was waiting for her. That night, I checked my footage again. Karen was back in my driveway, ripping up my daisies. I saved the clip and called Sarah. She's self-destructing, Sarah said. Let's make sure the sheriff sees this. The stage was set for the final act, and Karen was about to learn that my driveway wasn't her biggest mistake. Here we are, folks, the grand finale of my showdown with Karen, the HOA dictator who thought my driveway was her personal fiefdom. I'm Jack, retired and done with her nonsense, sitting on a powder keg of evidence, security footage, property records, and a neighborhood fed up with her clipboard tyranny. After the HOA meeting where I turned her minions against her, Karen went full meltdown, vowing to escalate to the sheriff and rip up my daisies like they'd personally insulted her. Big mistake. She didn't know who I was, or who I knew. The morning after the meeting, I woke to find my front yard looking like a raccoon had a vendetta. My daisies were shredded, dirt scattered across my pristine driveway, and a new "No trespassing" HOA property sign was jammed into my lawn. Karen's handiwork caught on my security camera at 2 a.m. I saved the clip, emailed it to my lawyer friend Sarah, and added it to the Karen file, now thick enough to double as a doorstop. Sarah called me, laughing. She's digging her own grave, Jack. Let's finish this. I knew Karen's sheriff threat was coming, so I made a preemptive move. I called the sheriff's department and asked for Sheriff Dan, an old friend from my pre-retirement days when I handled things a lot scarier than HOA fines. Dan was happy to hear from me, especially when I sent him the Karen file, complete with footage of her spray painting my driveway, planting signs, and now massacring my daisies. This lady's a piece of work, he said. Want me to swing by? I grinned. I'll be glad to see you. Sure enough, that afternoon, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Karen was already in my driveway, waving her clipboard like a battle flag, probably expecting to see me cuffed. Instead, Sheriff Dan stepped out, all 6 feet 4 inches of him, with a badge that gleamed like justice itself. I walked out, coffee in hand, and leaned against my porch. Karen launched into her spiel. Sheriff, this man's been trespassing on HOA property, defacing signs, and harassing me. Her voice hit a pitch that could summon bats. Dan didn't even glance at her. He turned to me, snapped a crisp salute, and said, Jack Sullivan, good to see you, sir. You okay? Or is this lady causing you trouble? My grin could have lit up the cul-de-sac. Karen's jaw dropped so fast I thought it'd dent my driveway. I'm fine, Dan, I said. Just dealing with a neighbor who thinks she owns my property. Got the records and footage to prove she's wrong. I handed him the Karen file, and he flipped through it, his eyebrows climbing higher with each page. Karen tried to interject, waving her phone. I have proof. The HOA has jurisdiction. Dan cut her off, holding up the footage still of her ripping up my daisies. Ma'am, this looks like vandalism. And this? He showed her the spray paint clip. That's trespassing. Care to explain? Karen stammered, her clipboard trembling like it was about to mutiny. I was protecting the community. Dan didn't buy it. You're on private property, ma'am. County records say this is Jack's. You're lucky he's not pressing charges, yet. The neighborhood was watching now. Tom leaned out his window, giving me a thumbs up. Mrs. Henderson stood on her porch, her cat purring smugly. Karen's minions, who'd shown up expecting a victory, started slinking away. I couldn't resist a jab. Karen, you want to borrow my lawnmower to fix the mess you made? Her face went purple, and she muttered something about suing everyone. Dan handed me back my file. Jack, you need anything, you call me. This one's done. He saluted again, just to twist the knife, and drove off. Karen's empire crumbled fast. The HOA board, spooked by my petition and Sarah's legal letter, called an emergency vote and ousted her as president. Her realtor buddy stopped returning her calls after Sarah sent him a cease and desist for trespassing. The neighborhood rumor mill churned. Karen was facing fines for her own violations, and her McMansion was suddenly up for sale. Tom threw a barbecue to celebrate, and half the cul-de-sac showed up, toasting to Jack's driveway. Mrs. Henderson even brought a daisy-shaped cake. I replanted my flowers, power-washed Karen's yellow paint off my driveway, and hung one of her signs in my garage as a trophy. Karen's been quiet since, but I keep my camera rolling, just in case her clipboard army stages a comeback. If she tries again, she'll find out I've still got a few tricks from my old life and an old sheriff friend. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.